Hey guys, Neil Orfield here, and I'm going to show you how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher for tonight's showdown slate between the Chiefs and the Raiders. This is for DraftKings, and I'm setting up for the largest field GPP on DraftKings. So that's my approach. This is not the approach that I would take for cash games or really small field contests. This is only for the largest field contests. This is how I will be setting up my fantasy cruncher. I start on the main screen. I've actually already switched my columns around. I have a quick view saved in here, Showdown Settings, and as you can see, nothing changed because I already clicked this, but it sets it up so that the middle of my screen shows the columns that I want to see, my projections, ownership projections, any exposure cap that I put on, how often I get a player once I've done crunches, etc., etc. That's just what I want to see in the middle of the screen, so I've set up a quick view so that I can see that. And then most of the work that I'm going to do here is in the advanced options. I work in two tabs here, the general tab and the groups tab. I'll start in the general tab, unique players per lineup. So this is how different your lineups are from each other. I'm okay with my lineups just being one player away from each other. I run 150 lineups. You're probably going to run into some ugly lineups if you don't set it at one. If you are doing fewer than 150 lineups, if you're doing 20 lineups or fewer, I would recommend maybe changing this to two just for diversification of your portfolio. So you're less likely to lose all of your money if you diversify a little bit. That is a matter of personal preference. So you could keep it at one, even if you're doing fewer than 20, but that would probably be my recommendation. Unique players. No, sorry, skip to the team salary tab. I don't set a minimum salary. Again, this is for the largest field GPP on DraftKings, or the largest field GPPs. There are several on there. I am trying to differentiate my lineups from others. I don't want to have my lineups duplicated by other players so that if I win, which takes a lot of luck, no matter how good your lineup is, no matter how well it projects, it takes a lot of luck to win these contests. If I do win, I don't want my lineup to be duplicated 200 times. If I'm in a contest where the first prize is $1 million, I'd like to win, at least 100,000 in that ballpark. So I want to be duplicated preferably 10 or fewer times. That's kind of a matter of personal preference too. You got to keep in mind that, anytime you are going away from the projections a little bit, you're becoming less likely to win. If you play lower projected lineups, if you leave salary on the table, you are less likely to win. But my goal is to win as much as possible on the nights that I do win these contests. So I'm trying to differentiate and make lineups that are not duplicated a ton. Therefore, I like to leave a little bit of salary on the table because generally, if you use the full salary cap, you're more likely to run into lineups that are duplicated many times over. And even if they do win, you're not going to make too much money. So I'm going to set a salary cap here. And again, this is personal preference. The lower you set your salary cap, the less likely you are to win, the more you're likely to win if you do hit. I'll set the salary cap here for 49,000. That's leaving $1,000 on the table. DraftKings allows for up to 50,000. We're allowing though only up to 49,000 to avoid some duplication. Offensive players versus defense. The default is set to max 2 players. I changed to 5 players. I'm totally fine with it. If my defense, if I have 5 players from one team and then just the defense on the other team, this is a slate where it seems less likely that will be optimal, but it's still within the range of outcomes. And not many people like to play 5 players from one team and then just the defense on the other team because they assume, well, if 5 players are all doing well from one team, then most likely the defense is not doing that great for the other team. But that's not necessarily true in terms of fantasy production because the defense picks up points through sacks, through turnovers, maybe a pick 6. So they can pick up points in ways that, obviously it hurts the opposing offense, but not necessarily to the extent that the opposing offense can't do well overall. So I like I set that to 5 max players from one team against the opposing defense. Global exposure caps, I leave this at 100%. I will go in and set a max cap on players in the captain position generally, not always, but usually I do set a max cap in the captain position, but I will do that on the main screen. use randomness. I do use randomness. I use a good bit of randomness. The amount of randomness that you use kind of comes down to how much control you want over your lineups. If you want more control over your lineups and who makes it into them, then you use lower randomness. You could even use, I know several players who use zero randomness. I like to use a good amount of randomness and leave some of this up to chance, also as a way to make sure my lineups are a little bit more differentiated from each other and from other people's lineups. Minimum projection included calculation. The default is set to 3. I typically leave it at 3, and then I will adjust projections if I need to get players who are projected for fewer than 3 fantasy points. If I want them to be in my player pool, I'll just give them a little bit of a projection boost to make sure that they're above that 3 threshold so they can make it into some lineups. And then players from each team, max 5 is the default. I leave it at 5. I don't mind it at all. If I get 5 players from one team and just 1 from the other, those onslaught kind of lineups are underutilized typically in showdown contests. So I like those lineups quite a bit. So I leave that at 5. And then finally, I'll move to the groups tab and I'll make a couple groups. Hey guys, if you're a new Stokastic Plus Platinum or NFL user and want to give our NFL DFS tools a test run before purchasing, we have a great offer for you. Get access to all of our NFL DFS tools 100% free for 3 days. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer on Stokastic.com, including new tools such as our lineup generator and player compare, as well as player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, our boom bust tool, and so much more. Click the link in the description of this video below to join to activate your 3-day free trial now. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this trial offer. And generally, the biggest concern with groups is quarterbacks. There's a lot of different correlations you can find, but quarterbacks are the one correlation where if they're not rushing or scoring ways other than passing the ball, they are going to be outscored on just about every play that they make. Even if they are scoring fantasy points, quarterbacks typically are scoring fewer fantasy points than whoever they're throwing the ball to, or I should say, if they're throwing the ball, then they're always scoring fewer fantasy points than whoever they're throwing the ball to. So you do need to be worried about correlation when it comes to quarterbacks, and that's why they are the main focus of the groups that I make in Fantasy Cruncher. I'll start with a Mahomes group. I'll make Mahomes that captain as a key player. And worth noting, quarterbacks are also generally some of the most expensive players on the slate. So that's another reason they score fewer points per play that they're involved in. And also they're more expensive. So you really need to worry about some correlation with quarterbacks and making sure you have your settings make sense so that you can have the optimal lineup. All right, so we've got Mahomes in the captain spot. Now I'm going to go ahead and add all of his pass catchers to a secondary group. So I use the key player for Mahomes. Mahomes in the captain spot is my only key player in this group, and then the secondary group is going to be the pass catchers, and I use this button for the secondary group. So Juju, MVS, Watson. And again, I'm only adding Chiefs pass catchers here. I'm going to add running backs as well. Mahomes is not afraid to throw the ball to his running backs. Okay. So this is the group. Because Mahomes is in the captain spot, I don't have to worry about adding, these pass catchers in the group as captain spots as well. These are all just these players in the flex spot. And the key decision point is what I'm doing down here with these settings. If any key players is used, so that's Mahomes in the captain spot, use at least one player from this group. I think I'm going to leave it at 1. You could say only apply a plus minus adjustment, so you don't require any of these pass catchers. But Mahomes doesn't throw enough that I want to do that. But he also, doesn't run enough that I want to run him out there in the captain spot without any pass catchers in the flex. But he does run enough that I think that it's at least conceivable that he will have a spike week running, score a touchdown on the ground, and could be optimal in the captain spot with just one pass catcher in the flex spot. So since I'm running 150 lineups, I'm going to allow for the possibility that I have Mahomes in the captain spot with just one pass catcher elsewhere in the lineup. If you're making, 20 or fewer lineups, I might set this to 2 players instead, just because it is fairly unlikely. It's definitely an outlier that we would have Mahomes in the captain spot with just one pass catcher in the flex. He doesn't run enough that that's a likely outcome. It's just within the range of outcomes. So for me, with 150 lineups, I'm going to leave this at use at least one player from this group. If you are making 20 or fewer, I think I would recommend changing that to 2 players from this group and just going for the more likely outcome. And then I'm also going to give boost to these players. Juju already projects great point per dollar, but I'm still going to give him a little bit of projection, make it more likely I get him in my Mahomes lineups. Same thing with MVS. Watson, currently not even in my player pool because he's projected for under 3 fantasy points. I will change that. Giving Kelsey a lower projection just because of his price tag and his projection already being pretty high. With his price tag, it's a little bit harder for Kelsey to be in the optimal without outscoring Mahomes. So I'm going to give him a little bit lower of a boost, and also because he projects so well that he's likely to be in a lot of those lineups anyway. And you could give boost to these running backs as well. I don't think I'm going to bother. Maybe I'll give these guys higher. Usually I start around 12 and then adjust as I need to. Okay, I think that's good enough. I'll leave it there. So now it makes it more likely that when I have Mahomes in the captain spot, because I've given these players boosts, I'm more likely to get more than one pass catcher in lineups with Mahomes in the captain spot. But I'm going to get at least one because that's what I set my group rules to. So that's what I'm doing with Mahomes. And then I'll make a similar group for Derek Carr. All right, Derek Carr in the captain spot as my key player. And in the secondary group, I will add Raiders pass catchers. Guessing some of those running backs are going to be inactive, but for now, I'm just going to include all of them in the group. Okay, so we've got Derek Carr in the captain spot with all of his pass catchers. Derek Carr runs it even less than Patrick Mahomes, so I think I might be inclined to even change this to 2 players from this group. Certainly with 20 or fewer lineups, I would set this to 2. With 150, I'm a little bit more likely to keep it at 1 and then just give boosts, but I think I'm going to set this at 2. Derek Carr hasn't scored a rushing touchdown in a couple of years now. He is not a great rusher. So he's a little bit unlikely to have that rushing spike week, although of course it could always happen that he falls into the end zone from the 1-yard line. But he's less likely than a lot of quarterbacks. So I think setting this to 2 players is reasonable. So now I'm going to get at least 2 players from this group in every lineup that has Derek Carr in the captain spot. And then maybe I'll give a little bit of a boost to his pass catchers as well. And I'll leave out the running backs for the boosting purposes. All right, so we've got those groups set up. Now you got to decide, do I want to make similar groups for Patrick Mahomes in the flex spot or Derek Carr in the flex spot? I think I probably am going to. I don't think that I would like to have lineups that have Patrick Mahomes in a flex spot without any of his pass catchers anywhere else in the lineup. So I think I'm probably going to create those groups as well. Mahomes in the flex spot as my key player. And now once again, adding all those Chiefs pass catchers to the secondary group. And now, because I have Mahomes in the flex spot, I can also add his pass catchers as captains to the secondary group. So I'm going to add Travis Kelce captain, CEH, Juju. Okay, good enough. Hey guys, if you're a new Stokastic Plus Platinum or NFL user and want to give our NFL DFS tools a test run before purchasing, we have a great offer for you. Get access to all of our NFL DFS tools 100% free for 3 days. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools for NFL DFS that we have to offer on stokastic.com, including new tools such as our lineup generator and player compare, as well as player projections, ownership projections, top stacks, our boom bust tool, and so much more. Click the link in the description of this video below to join to activate your 3-day free trial now. Please note that Fantasy Cruncher is an add-on and is not included with this trial offer. So now I'm requiring at least one Chiefs pass catcher in every lineup that has Mahomes in it, even in the flex spot. Now, you could give boost to some of these players. You don't necessarily need to. I think that you should at least set a group that says have at least one of these players in it. Whether you set boost, kind of up to you. Definitely not required. I'm going to give a little bit of a boost to the pass catchers who more positively correlate with Mahomes. But again, this is just something I set it up, and then later on I might come back and change these settings a little bit. But these are typically I don't have to worry about it a ton. Usually my lineups end up coming approximately how I like them to look. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with Carr and the flex. As my key player. Then I'm going to add all these pass catching options. These are in the secondary group. And again, I'm going to add them as captains as well. Okay, so now every lineup where I have Derek Carr in the flex spot, I'm going to have at least one pass catching option somewhere else in the lineup. You might not even need to include these running backs. Most of them are probably kind of irrelevant to this group, but I like to include the running backs if they have some possibility of scoring some fantasy points through the air. But again, I'll give little boost to the more positively correlated plays at captain. Generally, I'm just doing the receivers and the tight ends. Okay, good enough. These groups look fine to me. We'll see how the lineups come out. And now I'll go and I'm going to set an exposure cap on just players at captain spot. So I'm going to go to the exposure column, edit, exposure cap to 20. Again, that's kind of a matter of personal preference. If you want 100% Patrick Mahomes in captain spot, you could, lock him in. If you want 100% Travis Kelce, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of different ways to go about this. I spread out my captain ownership on most slates, not all. It's a slate dependent thing, but a lot of the times I set that at 10, 20. Sometimes I'll change it to 10. Really is slate dependent. 150 lineups using my projections. Right away, we see Mahomes in the captain spot with 3 receiving options in the flex. I like to see that. Devontae Adams in the captain spot. We have the positive correlation with Derek Carr in the flex. I gave a little bit of a boost to Devontae Adams in the captain spot. when I have Derek Carr in the flex spot. So you see that coming out there. MVS in the captain spot with Patrick Mahomes in the flex looks good. Hunter Renfrow with Derek Carr looks good. Now, you may have seen, if you've read my articles, you know that sometimes I like to leave out those correlations where if I have a pass catcher in the captain spot, sometimes I prefer to not have the quarterback in the flex spot. So, for example, if I had Travis Kelce in the captain spot, sometimes I'd like to see this lineup without Patrick Mahomes in there, just because people do overuse that to some extent. A lot of people, a lot of more casual players will automatically, if they put Travis Kelce in the captain spot, they'll immediately say, now I'll put Mahomes in the flex. It makes sense. There is positive correlation there. But it is, I think, a little bit overused. So sometimes I do like to see lineups without that correlation. So far, we haven't seen it. I'm seeing every time I've got a pass catcher in the captain spot, I've got their quarterback in the flex. I'm trying to find if I have an example where that doesn't happen. And so far, not a ton. Got Jacobs, didn't give any boost to Carr for Jacobs in there. I guess part of the reason we're seeing so much of it is the quarterbacks are just pretty highly owned. Holmes in particular, 67% is going to be in most lineups regardless. Carr a little bit lower owned. Okay, here we go. Hunter Renfrow in the captain spot. No Derek Carr. Derek Carr is not necessary even if you have Hunter Renfrow in the captain spot. The reason being that every time Derek Carr throws the ball to Hunter Renfrow scores more fantasy points than Derek Carr. So Hunter Renfrow can put up a ton of fantasy points without Derek Carr putting up a lot, as we just saw with Cooper Kupp. This week, we saw Cooper Kupp put up a ton of fantasy points on, I think it was Thursday Night Football, and Matthew Stafford had a really bad game. So Cooper Kupp was the optimal captain, like 40 fantasy points in the captain spot, and Matthew Stafford was not in that lineup. That happens a fair amount, and it's underrepresented typically. But I'm not getting to a ton of it in this just because I'm getting a lot of Chiefs pass catchers in the captain spot, and then Patrick Mahomes also already projects really well here. More likely to see it with the Raiders players, Renfrow in the captain spot, no Derek Carr. Anyway, in general, these lineups look okay to me from a correlation perspective. Now we'll go up and look at individual players. So I like my exposures at different levels for each player, and I go position by position, looking at each tab. Quarterback tab, getting to a ton of Patrick Mahomes, probably a little bit more than I want, but I wouldn't mind getting to 67% Mahomes. He is the highest projected player on the slate by quite a bit, so it's not really a problem for me if I'm getting to a ton of Patrick Mahomes. Maybe I'd want a little bit more Derek Carr, but he just projects so much worse than Patrick Mahomes. He's in the same bucket as Travis Kelce and Devontae Adams. They all project fairly similarly. 32% looks fine. Running backs, I'm getting to 26% Josh Jacobs. That seems fine. 16% CEH seems fine. Getting to a little bit of these lower owned guys. Not getting to any Isaiah Pacheco. Maybe I'd want to get to more Pacheco. He looked really good last week. He just hasn't really had the opportunity. Who knows? Maybe it's coming. I'll give him a little bit of a boost and see if he can get into some of my lineups. Just kind of eyeballing what those projection would need to be to get him into a few lineups. That might not even be enough, but I'll start there. Do I want any Zamir White or Jacob Johnson, Michael Burton, Amir Abdullah? I don't really know how much I really want of these guys, to be honest, but if I'm going to get them at least in my pool to be potential options, I'm going to have to give them projections of at least 3. Zamir White being more expensive, I'd probably have to give him a little bit more. Kind of eyeballing it, though. There's no real science to it. Sky Moore, not getting into any lineups. These Sky Moore and Justin Watson both don't project well enough to make it into lineups. Currently, they don't have at least 3 fantasy point projections. Sky Moore was more involved last week than he has been all season, so maybe we start seeing him trend up at 4% ownership. I'll probably take some shots. Justin Watson, we've seen have at least one big game this year. I don't know how often he'll be involved with the Chiefs, with all the wide receivers in front of him. If nobody gets hurt, he's probably less likely to be involved, but he has been a bit involved, so I'm going to include Justin Watson as well at low ownership. Not getting to a ton of Devontae Adams. Maybe I want a little bit more. And I should mention here that I crunch this like 20 times. So what I'm doing right here, these little changes I'm making, I just do it incrementally, and I'm kind of experimenting. I'll change these numbers, and then I'll go back and I'll keep changing them until I get to exposure levels that I like of each player. So these don't really read too much into the changes I'm making here. These are far from final. Not getting to any Darren Waller. I think that would be a mistake. Waller does not project well at all, point per dollar, but he obviously has that spike week upside. He can put up points in a hurry, so I'm going to want to have some Waller in my portfolio. Get into a good amount of Matthew Wright, not so much Daniel Carlson. Looks okay. Not getting too much of the defenses at all. Not necessarily a mistake on this slate. These offenses are just likely to put up a ton of fantasy points. Pretty competent in general, but I think that I would like to get to some of these defenses at least. So I'm going to give them slight fantasy point projection boosts. Try to get to a little bit. And also, as I'm doing this, I'm keeping in mind that every time I boost one player's projection, it relatively lowers every other player's projection relative to that player, because all projections are relative to each other. So anytime I'm changing one projection, you have to think about how does that affect every other player in the lineups in the set. And I did not give the defenses enough of a boost to really get much in this. Maybe I'll keep going, change these up a little bit more. Kicker is still not getting to a ton of Carlson. Am getting a fair amount of Wright. Maybe I'll give Carlson a little boost. 12% Waller looks more like it. Get into a lot of Jody Fortson. I don't know how much Jody Fortson I'm going to end up getting to, but these tight ends are fairly involved. The Chiefs like to do trick plays where they involve their tight ends at the goal line. I don't know. I don't mind playing some Chiefs backup tight ends in general. Still not getting to a ton of Sky Moore. Maybe I'll give him a little bit more of a boost. I don't know. We'll see. Again, these are not final at all. I'm going to be messing with these and crunching several times. I know I'm going to want more than 7% Matt Collins. He has been very involved in the Raiders offense so far this year. He's run the second most routes on the team, and he's received the third most targets. He's been very involved. So I think I'm going to want to have a little bit more Matt Collins at his 5,000 price tag. I'm getting to a ton of MVS, Juju, Renfro, not a ton of Devontae Adams. Maybe, I'm just looking through each position. What do I need to do to get to exposure levels that I like for different players before not getting to a ton of these lower projected options? Who knows? I guess I'd be 8% of Jacob Johnson is honestly probably too much. 8% of Amir Abdullah, probably too much. I think Michael Burton is probably my favorite from the group just because of the Chiefs' likelihood of involving players who are not used most of the field. They involve them more at the goal line for some reason. So maybe I'd be more likely to use Michael Burton than these other guys. But anyway, this is, again, more art than science. This is not an exact thing at all that I'm doing. I'm just literally, this is my process. I go through, I look at different positions. And typically for newer players, I would trust the projections. And rather than actually changing the projections as I've been doing, I would be using the thumbs up and thumbs down feature to get more or less of certain players. And I would, with the exception of players who project for under 3 fantasy points, if you do want them to be included in your lineup set, you're going to need to at least boost them to 3 fantasy points. But in general, newer players, I would recommend just using the thumbs up, thumbs down. Honestly, might be what I should be doing a little bit more of the time. Also, the way I do it, I change projections for most players in the flex roles, and then I also look at captain. Sometimes I'll look at the captain spot and say, okay, this player, I don't really want to change the projection to get a lot more of them in the flex spot, but sometimes maybe I want more of a player in just the captain spot. So that's a nice thing you can do if I don't want to change CEH's projection to get more of him in the flex spot, but I do want to get some more CEH captain lineups. Maybe I'll give him the thumbs up just in the captain spot. Another little trick that I do sometimes. And I crunch again and then repeat. Exact same process. Do I like how much I'm getting different players? Okay, I gave 2 thumbs up to CEH, went from getting 1% to getting 10%. So you can see how much things change in a hurry with those little boosts with the thumbs up, with change in projections. You can change things around really quickly. Still getting 0 Isaiah Pacheco. Man, I'm really giving him a big projection boost to get him. I think I'd be okay with that. It's probably an approach I'll take, but I haven't really thought through my exact lineups, exactly how much I want of different players yet. I'm just kind of giving you an example of the kind of thought process that I go through when I'm making my lineups. But I think this is good enough. I'll show you. I did get a request to sort lineups by top projected. So you can see what my highest projected lineups look at. And of course, this is using my projections. So these are with the adjustments that I've made to projections. So these are not the top Stokastic projected lineups necessarily, but they look good. Mahomes with MVS and Juju. And then we've got Carr with Renfro and the Raiders defense. Again, so the Raiders defense with Mahomes at captain, not a lot of people going to be doing that. It's, maybe a little bit less likely to hit than you would like, but it's probably more likely to hit than the field will use it because the Raiders defense can put up fantasy points again. Sacks, turnovers, touchdowns. There are a lot of ways for the Raiders to score fantasy points that only minimally impact the opposing offense. So I don't mind having Patrick Mahomes in the captain spot with the Raiders defense in a flex spot. Here we've got the full onslaught Mahomes with 4 pass catchers and then Hunter Renfro on the comeback. Looks fine to me. Similar Mahomes, 2 pass catchers, kicker, Hunter Renfro. Looks fine. So in general, my highest projected lineups are going to be the Patrick Mahomes in the captain spot. That is not a huge shock to me because Mahomes does project the best of anybody on this site. Anyway, that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching and good luck tonight. Hope you can win some money using this or a similar process.